What's up, guys? So as many of you know, I just installed a brand new Avantis Solo at one of our campuses, and I want to talk about it. So I want to start this video off by explaining a little bit about my process for how I chose the Avantis Solo. So right now I am game planning a pretty massive overhaul at our campuses, where we are going to be installing the same console at every campus. As it currently stands, we are using a bunch of different consoles, from X32s, we have a Wing at a campus, we have an SQ7 at a campus, we still have a couple of old Roland M300s at campuses, and it can make it really challenging to train people at the campus level. Really, it can be a lot to manage as one person. So in order to give our campuses a little bit more in-depth training and be able to provide more support, we are transitioning all of our campuses over the course of the next couple of years to an Avantis system. So I was on the hunt for a system that was going to meet the price point that I really wanted to hit, and was going to be volunteer friendly, and was going to be a system that would scale really well to the different size campuses that we have. We have some campuses that are fairly large and some campuses that are a bit smaller, and I needed a system that was going to be able to handle all of those. So originally I started looking at the SQ series. So if you don't know, Allen Heath makes the SQ series, which is the SQ5, the SQ6, and the SQ7. They are different sizes, and they are all 48 channel boards. The SQ series is really cool. I've had some opportunities to use it. We have one at one of our campuses. We have an SQ7, and it was pretty high on my list when I was originally planning this upgrade. I spent a lot of time thinking about how it would implement at all of our different campuses. So the SQ series has a 7-inch capacitive touchscreen. It feels really good, it's pretty responsive, and overall it does the job. However, I have noticed at the one campus that we implemented it a while ago, there have been a lot of struggles when it comes to training, and a lot of that stems from the fact that that 7-inch touchscreen really isn't big enough to do a lot of the touch controls on the interface that they've added to that system. For more experienced engineers, it's really not a problem. I had no issue setting it up, but I originally did notice that there are a lot of things on there that are designed to be touched and dragged across the screen and all that feel really weird on that small of a screen. It almost feels like you are programming your console on a cell phone, and it's not a problem. Like I said, if you are an experienced engineer, you can probably figure it out. But I have noticed that some of our less experienced engineers have really struggled to get a grip on the UI of the SQ series. Now, I still really like the SQ series. I like that the SQ5 has the ability to be rack mounted with some rack ears, and it makes it a really good choice if you are a portable church and you are looking for a system that's a bit better than the X32, especially considering that the equivalent X32 is the X32 Producer, which does not have scribble strips on it, and you're still going to be limited to the lower bus count of the X32 system as a whole. So I think that the SQ5 is a really good value, and it's a good jump up from the X32 Producer. I do like the amount of faders that are on the SQ7, and I think that having that much tactile control on the fader level is really awesome. I think the more faders, the better. However, the fact that it's all limited by that 7-inch touchscreen and there's not a ton of tactile control on the actual surface itself, and it doesn't have like a clearly defined like channel strip section, it makes it a little bit challenging to train somebody that's never used a digital system before. So when Allen Heath dropped the Avantis, I was really excited. Now, obviously the Allen Heath Avantis is quite a bit more expensive than the SQ series, making it more of a competitor with the Pro 2 when the Pro 2 originally came out. So it seems to me that the Avantis has kind of taken on the it has become the spiritual successor to the Pro 2, especially in the church world. But then last year, Allen and Heath brought the Avantis Solo to the mix. And now this is where I think things get really, really interesting. All of a sudden, the Avantis is available around the $10,000 mark, which makes it really, really competitive and a really good value for a 64-channel system with a bunch of bus capabilities and the D-Pack plugin pack that they offer. It's a really good proposition, so I started looking into it. And eventually, I decided that the Allen and Heath Avantis Solo would be a great option for our smaller campuses, and that the full-size Avantis would be the best option for our larger campuses. This is great because it's incredibly scalable, and it allows me to train on one system that everybody can get familiar with, while not necessarily spending the extra money for the full-size Avantis at smaller campuses that also don't have a ton of space in their booths. So while the initial investment might be a bit more than the SQ series, when it comes to trainability, it's one of those things that I think is 100% worth the extra money. Now that said, if you are a church that doesn't have multiple campuses and you don't need 64 channels, I still believe that the SQ series is a really, really good option. We have the SQ7, like I said, and since some of the software updates that have come out for it have made it a lot more stable, we did have some initial issues with that console crashing every now and then, and it wasn't just a software crash where, you know, it just quits showing anything on the screen and audio comes out. It was pretty catastrophic when it would happen, and it was destructive to the audio as well. So that hasn't happened since the most recent software update, so I think that they've got that mostly sorted out. But every now and then I have noticed that the SQ7, when you're running a higher channel count with a lot of busing, when you're running the console to its maximum, which for a 48 channel board, a lot of times we would be, it does tend to just a little bit slow down. And that's a little bit unsettling to me. It's probably fine, not a big deal, and it would never necessarily cause any issues. But when I have to think about how this is going to scale to campuses that don't have any staff that is capable of troubleshooting problems or diagnosing these issues on site, when it's all 100% volunteer at our remote campuses that are up to 60, 70 miles away, I can't just drive out there on a Sunday morning and fix problems. So we had to start thinking a little bit more about a system that would be really robust and provide more capability than they would really ever need and offer that headroom to the campuses. So like I said, I just wrapped up our first install of an Avantis Solo system, and I want to talk you through some of the pros and cons that I have seen of this system, and just kind of like my first initial reactions to setting the system up and ease of use, trainability, all of that stuff. So the number one pro of this system is going to be the competitive price. The Avantis Solo, like I said, it's sitting right around that $10,000 mark. And if you get a 48 channel stage box or stage expander with it, that's going to put you out total with this system around $15,000. By the time you factor in tax, and if you get D-Pack, which I highly recommend, I think that D-Pack is one of the things that really makes this system worth the extra money. If you're going to get D-Pack and a Dante card, which you're probably going to need, which you will actually need some sort of expander in the back of it, whether it's Dante or another networking option for any sort of virtual sound check. That's something I did not realize before I bought it. Should have done a little bit more research. So like I said, the very competitive price. The Avantis Solo sits right around $10,000. By the time everything's said and done, you're probably in the $15,000 to $18,000 range for a complete system, which I can say is really, really competitive for 64 channels and 48 buses. The next thing I want to talk about is the build quality. It feels really, really good. And that was something I initially noticed with the SQ as well. they're just chunky systems. They feel like they could be tossed out of a window 2 stories up and they'd be totally fine. I don't recommend doing that, but it's just really well put together. And when you feel it, the faders feel really, really nice. The motorized action on the faders is really snappy. It doesn't feel like it's slow or anything weird like that. It definitely feels like the system is really, really well put together. The next pro that I really want to talk about, and again, it's one of the main reasons I bought the Avantis Solo, is the incredibly intuitive touch control. I am a huge skeptic when it comes to touch controls on audio consoles, especially when there's no physical backup on the system. It was something that I was a little nervous about when we actually transitioned our largest campus to Digico, the 225 that we have. With that big capacitive touchscreen, I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to be able to transition my thinking and my workflow to a touchscreen workflow. Now with the 225, it turned out to not be. It was a breeze. I didn't have any issues with that, especially with the amount of redundant control with the big channel strip right next to the screen. That was something I was already familiar with coming from a Midas system that I was on. So that was no issue at all. With Avantis, you don't have that same sort of tactile physical button control next to the screen, and it is pretty much all based on that screen itself. You do have a big row of encoders underneath the screen that you can swap the functionality, very similar to a Digico system where you can change what those encoders do at any given moment. I really like keeping that on the gain setting so that you can quickly adjust preamp levels. That's super handy to have right underneath your channels. But when I got this thing out of the box and I started putting together the show file, having only really experienced the newer Allen Heath systems on the SQ, I've never used DLive, but coming from the SQ, it was like what SQ should have been from day one. The menu system is really intuitive over there on the left side of the screen. Windows pop up whenever you select certain options on like processing, and those windows don't go away unless you make them go away or select something else to take its place. It's really intuitive. I like the way it's set up, and I didn't feel like there was much of a learning curve for me, forcing you to have to go all in on touch control on the screen. Even though I was a huge skeptic of that, I think the fact that it forces you to do it, and that there aren't random times where you're going to need a physical control or an encoder or something. You can do pretty much all of it right on the touchscreen. The fact that it's set up really well for touch-only controls is awesome, and it doesn't make it feel weird or like too new school or anything like that. I definitely feel like somebody that would be coming from analog could get used to this new system pretty quick because it forces you to. There's no moments where you're kind of searching for a knob because there's no knobs really. There's only 3 custom control knobs over to the right, and it doesn't really make you use those unless you really want to. This is something I haven't in my few days really messing with this. I haven't really forced that into my workflow yet, but I do have them set to different controls so that whenever you select a channel, it's your effects buses, so you can quickly change the like a verb send on a vocal if you select that channel. I do really like that, but the mix selection on the Allen Heath systems is really, really good too, where you just select the mix button and it flips everything to sends on fader. It's really, really nice. So the last thing I really want to talk about is DPAC, and this is one of the biggest wins I think on the Avantis and DLive systems from what I can see. On Avantis, DPAC is super powerful, and frankly I think it would not make a lot of sense to buy Avantis without also including the DPAC pre-installed or just buying it and installing it later. DPAC, if you don't know, is their deep plugin processing pack. So it has a bunch of different plugins that you can basically install on the console and use them all over the place. So a lot of them, you can use them on every channel. So you can swap out your compressor for like an 1176 or an LA2A. If you're familiar with the wing system, it's similar to that, but I will say its execution is way better than the wing. My biggest complaint with the wing is that I don't feel like any of those models actually respond or feel anything similar to what the actual hardware feels like when you're using it, or even just like a Waves version of that plugin. This actually executes those plugins really, really well. It's not always perfect. I have noticed that some of the compressors aren't quite there, but they're very close. And then also included with D-Pack is going to be Dyne 8, which I think is probably my big killer app that is on Avantis that I think is just awesome that they include this. So Dyne 8 is going to be your 4-band multi-band compressor and dynamic EQ all in one processor. So if you want to use a dynamic EQ, you can do that. If you're more of a multi-band compressor guy like I am for the most part, you can use that as well. And you can use up to 16 instances of it. So for me, that's pretty much the majority of what I would ever use. Well, it might not be something that you can just immediately throw on every channel and commit to using it everywhere, like you could like a C6 on Super Rack or something like that. The fact that you do have access to 16 of those processors, I think right now on the show file that I set up at the smaller campus that I did this past weekend, I'm only using like 5 of them, and I didn't feel like I needed any more across the show file. So that's really, really cool. I think this is the best thing that D-Pack has to offer. So if you're unfamiliar with multi-band compression and dynamic EQ, like I said, I'm more of a multi-band compressor guy. For the most part, I like to multi-band compress after my first initial round of EQ. Generally, I feel like that does everything that I need, and it feels, in my opinion, it feels more natural and a little bit less aggressive, where dynamic EQ is, instead of compressing the signal, it's actually going to be an EQ that is riding the input that is being sent to it. So if you have a vocal that is really harsh, but you, in lower moments of the music where they might not be singing as hard, you feel like they're not cutting through the mix enough, you can let their EQ breathe in that like 2 to 4K area. You can let their EQ breathe a little bit more than you typically would be able to, and then let that dynamic EQ kind of tame it whenever they start to sing really loud or kind of just belt out things with their vocal. Avantis has that built in with D-Pack, and it's really, really awesome. It's all right on the console, so you don't have to worry about any sort of third-party system being connected to it. It can all just be right there. And the great thing about this is that it's doing it all 0 latency. So you don't have to worry about phase coherence between different buses and all of that sort of stuff, which again, throw it all back to volunteer training and less things that can go wrong, but more tools available. So I love that I'm able to give these guys a little bit more of a sandbox to play in, to really tighten up their mixes and to really lean into them to deliver great mixes on their systems without having to give them a wave system that they then have to diagnose and troubleshoot if something goes wrong. So those are some of the pros that I have for the system. There's a lot of other things I really like about it, but those are probably the main things that just jump out to me, things that I want to share. The cons of the system. There aren't a ton, but there are a few cons to be aware of. I think most of these are going to be specific to the Avantis Solo, less than the Avantis system as a whole. So the Avantis Solo, obviously, it's a smaller console and you have a reduced fader count. So you do have to remember, it's a 64 channel system and you only have 12 faders. So there's a lot of diving into different layers. You could have, I think it's 6 layers of 12 faders, which is another thing that I'll talk about in just a second. But the fader count at times can get a little bit overwhelming. You're doing a lot of layer jumping if you're running a larger show. Now, I think that the show file that I was running this past weekend is probably around 40 channels, if that gives you an idea. And I did feel like I had to jump around quite a bit. Now, some of that is actually because of the next thing I want to talk about, which is the amount of layers that you have. So the full-size Avantis and the Avantis Solo both have the same amount of layers, but the Avantis Solo has less faders per layer. So you have 12 faders on each layer times 6. That gives you 96 total places on the console to place channels or buses or different things. 12 does get tight. 12 faders gets a little bit tight. And so I'm not able to separate my layers quite the way that I typically would, where I would maybe have like a drums layer and a band layer, and I have a transition layer that I like to set up that has my MC mics and my computer graphics and all that stuff, my Resi decoders, stuff like that. I can do most of that, but by the time everything's said and done, you do have a lot of channels or layers that are sharing with other things. So I might have like my transition layer, because I only have so many layers. I only have like 5 channels I need on that layer. So at the end of that layer, I'm also putting some other things that won't fit on any of my other layers. So outputs like my effect sends and returns and my IEM buses, stuff like that. It does get a little bit crowded. It is something to be aware of. I feel like, you know, putting some label tape down on your layers would probably help a lot, which I didn't have set up. And also it's the first Sunday that I've ever used it. So I feel like giving it some more time to get my workflow figured out how I would actually use it, I would be totally fine with it, but it is something to be aware of. It gets tight, so just be aware of that. One other thing, and this would be a software thing that maybe they would implement at some point in the future, and maybe this is just me that wants this, but on the mixes, whenever you are selecting a channel, on any channel, I wish that you could temporarily lock that channel to the screen or its current fader where it's at. So if you could maybe like double tap the solo or something like that, I don't know, double tap the mix button and it locks it in place. That way you can go to other layers and it's still gonna live right here on your fader banks. Don't know if that makes any sense to you, what I'm saying right now, but that would be kind of handy at times, especially with different mixes. Like if you're selecting a mix on one layer and you need to do sends on fader, you're now jumping to other layers, but that mix bus disappears from your screen. So it's easy, really easy, I actually figured out, to forget you're on sends on fader. It can be that way on any console. I've had that issue in the past, especially when I first started. I struggled a little bit with that, remembering that you're on sends on fader. One thing with the Pro 2 is that flip button, the flip to faders, that button actually blinks at you to just remind you that you're on sends on fader the whole time. And on the Avantis, I will admit, it will say that you are on that bus. It'll kind of give all of your channels that color of that bus to let you know, hey, you are still mixing that bus. But the little the scribble strip thing at the bottom is really, really small on the bottom of the channels. So it can be really hard to for it to like stick out in your face and remind you. Whereas if I feel like if you were able to lock that, if your mix is especially automatically locked to the screen or moved over all the way to the right side of the screen and just kind of like sat there until you were done with a sends on fader with mixing that bus, I feel like that would be a handy upgrade to the software. As it stands, it doesn't do that. Not a huge deal. That's just a workflow thing that I feel like would be really, really cool. And then the last con, I mentioned it way earlier, but it's not really a con. It's just something that you do get used to in especially in the Behringer world. You get really used to being able to do this, but there's no USB card on it to do like any sort of USB virtual sound check. You do have that ability on the SQ series. You can't do all of your channels, but you can do a significant amount of them. On Avantis, I didn't even look it up to see because I just kind of assumed the SQ has it. Why wouldn't the Avantis have it? It does not. So it has a 2-channel audio recorder that you can you plug a USB into, and you can record to that USB. One cool thing about that actually is that it records directly to the console, and then you can copy that to the USB stick. I don't know if there is a way to set it up to where it will automatically record to the USB stick, but because it's recording at 96 kilohertz, which the whole system runs on, it's most USB sticks wouldn't be able to handle the that kind of bandwidth. So it's recording directly to the fast drive on the console itself, and then you can copy that to a USB stick. It's one extra step that takes a little bit of time, but now that I've seen them do that, I kind of wish there actually was that option on like a X32 or something like that, because I've had a number of times where I've recorded something to a USB stick and it got corrupted because for some silly reason either the USB stick was a slower USB stick and the audio got corrupted, which is really, really silly. But because this thing has a built-in drive on it, it is able to record some audio to it, and then you can just copy that to the USB. You can do that 2 channels, so you can record a 2-channel stereo bus. It doesn't matter what you're recording, but you can record that 2-channel stereo bus, whether it's your master or anything, and then you can play it back over a line in, so or a stereo input. It's a cool system. Just be aware, if you want to do any sort of virtual sound check, you do need to populate one of your expansion card slots with either Dante or some other system, MADI system, whatever, that can handle that many channels for recording and playback. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Avantis Solo. Again, I've never gotten to sit down and mess with a full-size Avantis. This is my first Avantis experience, and from what I can see, the Avantis Solo pretty much ticks all the boxes for me, but having that extra real estate would just be an absolute dream. But I'm really glad that they offer the Solo, because there are plenty of churches, especially like where I'm at, where we don't necessarily need a full-size Avantis at every single campus, but being able to get everybody on the same system, really, really cool. So that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you guys are not already part of our community Discord, go ahead and follow the link in the description below, and you can go ahead and become part of that community. That community already knew I was going to be putting this video out today, so sometimes I drop some hints to what's going to be coming up on the channel, and just some random resources that I find every now and then. So I like to keep the community updated on what's going on, and I want to hear back from you guys, stuff that you guys are looking for in content, resources that would be great for you guys. Speaking of resources, if you have not already checked out my DAW broadcast template, it is live now on my website, www.mattdoesaudio.com/broadcast template. It'll take you to that. You can check it out, decide if that's something that you're interested in. I also have a free X32 template if you want to play with that. I know a lot of guys that have used that to get their mixes a little bit better at their campuses, at their churches across the world. So yeah, just want to say thank you again for watching, and you guys take it easy.